Hello.
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 Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes. Yes. You are audible.
Yeah. So your session time is from 2 o'clock, na?
Yes. Yes. Just I am going to introduce you. Then I will be just
Sure. Yeah.
handing it over to you. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Well, very good afternoon to all the participants present over here. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome you all in the final day of the faculty development program in the recent developments in the field of computational biology. Now, today we have with us Dr. Mamata Dolui Chakraborty. I would like to introduce her just within a few moments. Dr. Mamata Dolui Chakraborty is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, National Institute of Technology, Durgapur, West Bengal, India. Her research interests include intelligent biomedical devices and assistive technology, hardware security, VLSI design and testing, theory and applications of cellular automata. So now I am requesting Dr. Chakraborty to deliver her speech. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon to one and all. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible, ma'am.
Okay. And may I please know who are the major participants? It's the faculties and also the students are there.
Oh, mostly some professors. Mostly they are professors.
Okay. So I think I should start.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes, professor.
I'm sharing my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay.
Fine.
Since it's an ongoing series of lectures, the participants might have, and some more details about these computational approaches has been described. Rather than focusing on the details of these computational approaches, theories behind them, I will start with a real life applications. We are currently working on some real projects. I will describe some details on this, specifically focusing on the specific application domains. So today I'll be discussing on the computational approaches in biomedical applications with two different case studies I'll be presenting. So before that, a brief introduction to the biomedical engineering streams. This biomedical engineering is basically the applications of the principles and techniques, mostly the problem-solving techniques of different engineering branches to the domain of biology and medicines. Potential applications of such branch is throughout the healthcare systems, from disease diagnosis to analysis and to the treatment and recovery process, monitoring of all these things. This comes under this stream. Biomedical engineering basically focuses on the advancements that can help in improving the human health and healthcare at several levels through the cross-disciplinary activities by integrating the different engineering sciences with the biomedical sciences and the clinical practices. Different domains that are concerned are basically the engineering, mathematics, computing, and science methodologies, which are being used for analysis of the biological and physiological problems. This is a growing and expanding interdisciplinary profession, as it is quite evident that it is an interdisciplinary profession wherein knowledge from different domains are essentially required. So this produces technological advancements basically in the healthcare domain, which is our major concern. Healthcare sector is very, very much important for the growth of the nation and all. This is a very emergency services. So applications of technologies in this domain, it is very much essential, and it's really, really very interesting and challenging also. So this basically includes acquisition of some new knowledge and understanding of the living organisms through some innovative and substantive applications of the experimental as well as analytical techniques, which are based on the engineering sciences. We collect data from the living organisms, we analyze those data, and for this analysis, we also develop new devices. For collection of data, we require to design newer kind of devices, specialized devices. We need to develop algorithm for doing the analysis and also generating some results. So these are the major concern of this domain. Specific potential applications of these branches are many, starting from the automatic blood pressure monitoring device that we encounter in our everyday life. This is a simple kind of thing. It ranges to a wide variety, like pacemakers or artificial hips. All these are implantable devices within the human body. To this, also it ranges to the more futuristic technologies like stem cell engineering or 3D printing of the biological organs. These kind of things, all these are examples of biomedical applications. So scope of this subject is to understand, design, and evaluate such systems and devices that can measure, test, or acquire some biological information from the living body. It can acquire knowledge of the basics of human physiology and biology, can perform some quantitative measurements as well as analysis of the typical biosignals. For example, we usually use the glucometer for measuring the blood sugar, which we frequently encounter in our daily life. With this sense, we take the blood sample, and through the sensor, the signals are being used. These are analyzed, and the results are produced instantaneously. So this kind of things, these are in the purview of this subject. It can describe the operational details of various medical monitoring and data acquisition systems. Also, it can describe and synthesize the computational processes of various contemporary medical devices. This biological process that that is going on in a living system, with which we can associate some computational process. We take the biological data and do some computational process for realizing different objectives, like monitoring of health status, for giving assistance to some specialized problems, some therapeutic processes or some assistive processes. All these things can be done. There are some associated terminologies which are very interchangeably used. It's biomedical engineering, bioengineering, or biotechnology, clinical or medical engineering, medical technology or healthcare technology. All these are concerning this domain. This biomedical engineering, basically it applies different engineering principles. For example, electrical and electronics, for the instrumentations and bioamplifiers. The knowledge of electrical and electronics domains are very much required for designing the artificial limbs or different prostheses like artificial hip, artificial hand, fingers, and all. The knowledge from mechanical engineering is quite necessary over here. For diagnostic imaging and therapeutic devices, physical systems knowledge is quite important. For biosensors and chemical analysis, knowledge from chemical engineering is essential. And we know that with the development in optical fiber and lasers, all these things, the surgery has become quite easier. So for all these, for fiber optic related equipments and procedures, knowledge from optical domain is also very much essential. And above all, computer science, it's nothing to be mentioned on that. It's computational medicine, signal and image analysis, information system, like information acquisition, information storage, information processing. All these are in the purview of computer science. So knowledge from computer science is quite important for this domain. And also the knowledge of material science, like for designing implantable devices, artificial teeth, artificial organs. So material science knowledge is also quite important over here. So biomedical engineers basically, they concern the design and manufacture of products that can be used for monitoring the physiologic functions or display of some anatomic detail. Also, they concern about detection, measurement, and monitoring of physiological signals such as biosensors, biomedical instrumentations, and medical imaging. These are very, very much essential and are quite widely being used in today's biomedical sector. Also, there are some devices which can help in assisting diagnosis and treatment of the patients, like computer analysis of the patient-related data. Suppose I can have some patient source data for certain time period. We are monitoring a critical patient with some physiological parameters, and those data will be analyzed for making some decisions. Like these decisions could be of diagnosis, it could be of treatment. Based on that, it could be of treatment plan and all. So clinical decision making and medical informatics, the medical information collection, organization, processing, restoring of the results, and all these things. Artificial intelligence, which is having a great impact on this, we would be taking care of these issues successively. Also supervise, a biomedical engineer can supervise the biomedical equipment maintenance and their technicalities. They can investigate the medical equipment failure. Whenever there's a failure, a biomedical engineer could have the knowledge of those devices, can can debug the issues, and also can advise hospitals for purchasing newer and specialized devices that could be also used for particular specific problems and all. Such medical devices, we can group them into three broad categories, like diagnosis devices, or which we call actually diagnostic devices, which helps in diagnosing a medical condition. For example, simple examples of such devices like stethoscope, the sphygmomanometer, thermometer. All these are examples of diagnostic devices which helps in diagnosis of some commonly occurring diseases. For example, the sphygmomanometer we use for measuring the blood pressure, which may lead to the manifestation of different kinds of diseases. So it could be used for diagnosis of those diseases, preliminary diagnosis. Even temperature, also same thing with the stethoscope. This is being used even in the in measuring the blood pressure. We use the stethoscopes to sense the pulse. To the stethoscope, we measure the heartbeat, which can be which can help in diagnosing arrhythmia and any several different kinds of medical conditions. The next one is therapeutic devices, the kind of devices which are used for the purpose of therapy. For example, this defibrillator, which is used for giving electrical pulses to the heart for doing some therapy to get out of some medical conditions. Also the intra-aortic balloon pumps, which is a pump which is inserted within the aorta to make the channel to make clear, to make the blood flow easier through the artery. This kind of devices helps in therapy. The third kind of devices is called rehabilitation, which is basically the assisting tools or assistive devices. For example, the leg prosthetics, the hand and finger prosthetics, these are helping these are actually making help for doing the regular activity with those damaged organs. These are used for the rehabilitation purpose. So diagnostic devices, basically this type of devices are used in recording and monitoring devices and measurement of the physical parameters and perform some analysis. Also, some imaging devices are used for diagnostic purpose. For example, X-ray and X-ray, CT scan, these are the diagnostic devices. Importance of such diagnostic devices are to enhance and extend the 5 human senses for an improved process of data collection from the patient for the diagnosis purpose. For having a proper treatment plan, diagnosis is very much important. So if we can, with the help of these diagnostic devices, we can make diagnosis more precise, more accurate. So this perception of the physician can be improved with the help of such diagnostic devices. Based on some initial symptoms, a physician can assess a medical condition manually. But if he or she can be assisted with such diagnostic devices, the diagnosis could be more accurate. So it basically amplifies the human senses. It places the observer sense in an inaccessible environment. Sometimes we don't have access to some physiological information by the physician itself. He or she cannot have access to some physical parameters manually. So those diagnostic devices can help accessing those physiological parameters. It can provide some new senses for making proper diagnostic and accordingly the treatment plan. Next is therapeutic devices, which is having the objective as to deliver physical substances to the body to treat the disease. It's the purpose of therapeutic devices is to do some therapy. It's having some objective of doing some therapy to treat a particular disease. So physical substances that it can supply to the body, it could be a voltage or current, a pressure, flow, force, ultrasound, electromagnetic radiation, heat, any kind of such physical substances it can give to the body. Such therapeutic devices are basically categorized into devices that are used to treat some disorders or devices that assist or control some physiological functions. Next is assistive or rehabilitative devices, which is having an objective to assist an individual with a disability. Suppose a person has lost his leg or hand in some accident. So the function for this organ, to restore this functionality, we can have artificial organs which can assist doing that person's daily functionality of that organ. For example, a blind person, we have a lot of such technological advancements for assisting the blind person. How he or she can communicate with others. There are assistive devices which help in communicating or understanding the emotions of the other person. There are a lot of such small technological advancements which help them in living their daily life. So there are a lot of such options available. Based on the particular need, those technology can be at the service of those particular persons. The disability can be connected to the troubles to perform activities of daily living. That I was telling, this helps in doing the daily activity. Sometimes it may overcome the limitations in mobility for communication disorders and all. Some sensory disabilities. The disabilities can have different forms. So these kind of separate customized devices can be applicable for different such devices. Now, types of rehabilitative devices, there are two different, mostly two categories of such devices: orthopedic devices, an orthopedic device, which is an appliance that aid in existing functionality, and prosthetic devices, a prosthesis, it provides a substitute, basically. Now, there are a lot of such challenges in there are a lot of such challenges we face, as here we need to deal with methods and devices that are used to solve medical problems, and these problems are inherently of diverse. Sometimes they are very difficult to handle, they are complex in nature, and wide variety of such problems. We cannot, in most of the cases, we cannot generalize those problems. So solution alternatives are limited and specific to certain kind of problem. We cannot, it's very difficult rather, we cannot make a particular device which can cover a lot of such medical conditions, which can help getting out a lot of medical conditions. So we must have the knowledge of what we are measuring or studying, what particular parameters we need to measure or study, what we are treating, what kind of disease we are going to treat, and which methodologies are available and which we can apply to treat that particular problem. So these domains should be considered with a clear knowledge. Also, there are other challenges like which deals with biological issues, organs and organ systems and their properties and functions. There are different biophenomena like bioelectricity, biochemistry, biomechanics, and biophysics which need to be dealt with. It requires their deep understanding. Until and unless we have clear understanding of these underlying subsystems, we cannot implement it, we cannot use it. And also this is very important for analysis. Now, other challenges include accessibility of data. Since some data are inherent to within the body, sometimes getting accessibility to those data are very difficult. So that is also a bigger challenge. An interface between the tissue and the instrumentation is also another issue. But there are some procedures, relevant procedures are basically three different procedures: non-invasive, minimally invasive, and invasive. Invasive means which are entering into the body. Non-invasive only from outside the body, and minimally invasive is we require minimal, suppose for a glucometer, we need to just prick a needle in our fingers to have 1 drop of blood. These are minimally examples of minimally invasive devices. Sorry. Yeah, I was there. Now, biomedical instrumentation, these are basically used for diagnosis and therapy, which depends heavily on the use of these medical instrumentations. And this medical procedure this where this medicine can be defined as a multi-step procedure on an individual by a physician or a group of physician or an institute which requires repeated applications, right? So we need to have repeated measures, repeated use of these devices, which results into some device disorders which we need to take care of. Now, this importance of biomedical instrumentation in the medical procedure, we need to perform these steps like collection of data. It may be a qualitative or quantitative. Quantitative means we are associated quantity, we know the measure, and qualitative means some state is associated. It's not, we cannot quantify it with the particular measure. We can have only associated quality. We need to analyze those data, then we need to perform some decision making, and then accordingly treatment planning based on the decision. In such biomedical instrumentation system, we basically have some sensors and actuator systems which helps in data acquisition. And with this, we have associated electronic interface which requires to transfer the collected data to the computation unit. Here, the associated computation unit is there, which gets the data, collected data. It stores the data, it organizes the data properly, it does some operations on the data and processes some result, analyzes the result, and gives a feedback to the system. So sensor basically, it detects a biochemical or bioelectrical or a biophysical parameter. A chemical or electrical or some physical parameter is being sensed by the sensor, and it provides a safe interface with the biological material that is under consideration. And an actuator, it basically delivers the sensed parameter to the external agent via a direct or indirect contact. It also controls the biochemical, bioelectrical, and biophysical parameters and provides a safe interface with the biological material. Then these electronic interfaces, it matches the electrical characteristics of the sensors or actuators with the computation unit. It preserves the signal to noise ratio of the sensor. It needs to assure the quality of the sensed data, and it passes it to the computing device. It preserves the efficiency of the actuator. It preserves the bandwidth of the sensor and actuator. It provides a safe interface with the sensor actuator as well as with the computation unit. And it also provides some signal processing task on the sensed signal for ensuring the signal quality, sometimes enhancing the signal quality also. And the computation unit, it provides a primary user interface. It provides primary control for the overall system. If the data sensed is being transferred to the computation unit, it stores the data, it organizes the data properly, it does the processing on the data to do the desired functionality, obtains the result, interpret the result, and gives a feedback. And it also maintains the safe operation of the overall system. Now, problems encountered in measuring a living system, there are certain challenges over there. Many crucial variables in the living systems are inaccessible. That we were just discussing. Some internal parameters are not easily accessible. It requires very specialized equipment for accessing those parameters. These variables that are measured are seldom deterministic. Also, nearly all biomedical measurements depend on the energy. It might be electrical energy or chemical energy or different kinds of energy. And operations of those instruments in the medical environment imposes important additional constraints. In a particular medical environment, a device needs to be operated with a close supervision of a trained technician, as well as some other, maybe in assistance with some other equipments. So this adds additional constraints in the data acquisition from the living system. So scientific method, in a scientific method, hypothesis is being made and it is tested by experiment to determine its validity. For example, we do have a problem statement. With this, we can do the review of prior work, state-of-the-art works being done. Then we form our hypothesis. Then we perform experiments with this hypothesis. We analyze the data. If in the analysis, during the analysis, we come out that more experiments are required for this, we design further experiment and perform those desired experiments, again analyze the data. If the problem is solved, we reach to the final conclusion. Our hypothesis is verified. In a scientific method, a hypothesis is basically tested by experiment for checking its validity. For example, we might hypothesize that physical exercise reduces high blood pressure, and yet we require experimentation and analysis to reconfirm the hypothesis. So for this, experiments are normally being performed multiple times to get it validated. And then the results can be analyzed statistically to determine the probability that the results might not have been produced by chance. The results, we need to do repeated experimentation to confirm the result. These results are then reported for final confirmation. So in such settings, we do have for a particular patient, suppose for an example, a physician is obtaining the medical history of a patient with certain complaints of, say, poor vision, then he would list, based on the complaints, he would list the possibility of the diseases. For example, diabetes could be one of the possibility. So with this chief complaint, the medical history is being obtained. They list the differential diagnosis methods. Differential diagnosis means there are one symptom would be caused by several different diseases. So with considering other symptoms and other parameters, ruling out the other possibilities and to converge the particular possibilities. So lists of the differential diagnosis are being made. With this, experimentation and tests are being performed. Then the data obtained from the experiment could be used to narrow the diagnosis, to rule out the other possibilities. And in this process, if further tests are required, so we need to select for those tests and have to suggest the experimentation to be performed. Again, we need to do the analysis. If only one likely option we can obtain, we can go for the final diagnosis, and accordingly treatment and evaluation part is being done. Yes, feedback in a measurement system. Here, see, this figure shows that this measurand is measured by a sensor converting the variable to an electrical signal, which can undergo a signal processing task. And sometimes these measurement systems provides a feedback through an effector to the measurand. See here, this is the measurand, which is being, this is, suppose it's a person whose some physical parameter is being sensed by a particular type of sensor. The signal is being conditioned, and then pre-processing and processing steps it passes through. Then it comes to this output unit through the data display and data communication. Also, these signals are stored into some specified storage for further use. Now, based on this signal processing, a feedback may be given to this subject or measurand over here. Now, in a practical scenario, it might happen that a patient, if it is concerning a patient might not understand the feedback properly. So if we have a clinician in between, who can act as a better interpreter of the results, which can help the patient in understanding this feedback from the instrument. For example, here's the patient, it's an instrument, the data is being sent. This is the entire module that we have included in this instrument that we have shown. A feedback is coming to the patient, but the patient might lack sufficient knowledge to interpret these signals. So we can have a clinician in between who can take this feedback, can understand and analyze, interpret this feedback, and passes it on in the form the patient can understand. Accordingly, if necessary, these experiments could be repeated. Yes, in some circumstances, the proper training of the patient and a well-designed instrument can lead to self-monitoring. Patient can do the self-monitoring in some cases, but in not all the cases. For example, a patient may need to monitor blood glucose. So with the help of a glucometer, the patient can easily test it at home. He or she can monitor the feedback given by the system, can easily interpret this. And if some absurd result or some problem, typical problem, he or she is encountering, then he or she can report to the clinician for further assistance. Some relevant measures regarding to measuring instruments like resolution, the smallest incremental quantity that can be reliably measured. For example, in a voltmeter, which is having a larger number of scales, can measure even a smaller range of values. So this could be having higher resolution rather than a voltmeter, which is having fewer digits. However, this high resolution cannot guarantee the high accuracy. We'll be coming to that. This precision, which is also another important measure. It's the quality of obtaining the same output from repeated measurements from the same input under the same condition. If we repeat the test several times and we are getting the same result, that ensures the high precision. High resolution implies high precision. Repeatability, the quality of obtaining the same output from repeated measurements from the same input over a period of time. During a considerable period of time, we are repeating the same experiments over and over, and we are getting the same result. Now see this diagrams to understand the precision, low and high precision. See here, these data points are lying, or the measured data points are lying scattered over here. So it's a low, it signifies low precision. And here, see, with several experimentation, the obtained results are closely spaced. So it indicates high precision. And accuracy, the difference between the true value and the measured value, it designates the accuracy. So for obtaining the highest, for obtaining the for the formula of accuracy, we generally take the difference of these two and divide it by the true value to get the actual accuracy values. For obtaining the highest possible precision, repeatability, and accuracy, it could be a major goal for any bioinstrumentation design. See here the data points, which are here. You see, this is the desired locations for a accurate estimation of the point. The points, the results that are obtained, these are closely spaced with several different experimentations. These are ensuring high precision, but these are not highly accurate. But here, all the data points are very close to this desired region. It's very close to the true value. So these are highly accurate. And also, since these data points are very closely spaced, this also ensures high precision. Next is calibration. These measuring instruments should be calibrated against a standard that can have accuracy 3 to 10 times better than the desired calibration accuracy. We can calibrate it with respect to some standardization as per the standard guidelines. Next, hypothesis testing. In hypothesis testing, there are we assume two different hypotheses, say A0 for the null hypothesis. That is it is a hypothesis that assumes that if the variable in the experiment, will have no effect on the final result. And HA is an alternative hypothesis which assumes that the variable we are considering, it will have an effect on the result. It will basically affect the final result being obtained. So for any population, one of the two hypotheses must be true. Either A0 or HA must be true. And our goal of this hypothesis testing is to find out which hypothesis is true by sampling the population. Basically, in reality, A0 is either true or false, and we draw a conclusion from our tests of either true or false. So from this, we can get 4 such possibilities. See here, if A0 is true, then we can have this correct decision. In that case, we would be accepting A0 and in turn, which implies rejection of the hypothesis HA. But due to some mistakes, some error, see, we are calling it as type 1 error, the variable under consideration, that is P, is having value A, which is basically an incorrect decision. Here, A0 is true, but it's resulting into some different parameter, which results into rejection of A0. Similarly, for HA, if HA is true and it's having some error, type 2 error, which is resulting for the variable under consideration with value B, which results into acceptance of A0, which basically due to this error, though HA is true, but it could be interpreted as HA false. So, which results into acceptance of A0. But with some percentage of cases where HA is perfectly all right, it's having the correct decision, in that case, we can correctly reject A0 and accept HA. So this could be mapped with a real-time true-false test for any disease condition. Suppose for a population, we are performing a test for whether a disease is occurring or not. For example, you can think of COVID testing, say COVID positive or COVID negative also. For any disease, we do this kind of analysis. So if we need to check the hypothesis has the condition. If the answer is no, we can for some percentage, we can result into true negative, which are actually negative. So our conclusion would be negative. But due to some error, we can have some percentage as false positive. Though it is negative, but it's showing positive. In that case, our conclusion may be positive. Similarly, if the disease condition is present, but still due to some error, it is diagnosed as false negative. It is diagnosed as negative. So we call this as false negative, and our conclusion would be negative. For a true positive cases, this is the correct cases correctly diagnosed as positive. So we conclude it as positive. For example, in terms of the table in previous slide, these are useful for defining measures that describes the proportion, for example, a disease condition for a population and the success of a test in identifying the disease condition. We define incidence as the number of cases of a disease during a stated time period, a considerable time period, such as X cases per 1,000 subjects per year. This corresponds to incidence of the disease, whereas prevalence is defined as the number of cases of a disease at a given time, such as Y cases per 1,000 subjects. At this moment, that is the prevalence. So with respect to this conditions for true positive, true negative, false positive, false negative, we can define this prevalence as this as the ratio of all diseased person divided by the total number of person. True positive who are correctly diagnosed as positive, and false negative who are due to some error who are mistakenly classified as negative though they are positive. So this designates the total number of diseased person and divided by the sum of all these four, which is the entire population. So this gives us the prevalence. Also, we should measure the sensitivity, the probability of a of a positive test result when the disease is present. So sensitivity is equals to the ratio of this true positive test result divided by the total number of diseased persons. So true positive divided by true positive plus false negative multiplied by 100%. So actually we represent this sensitivity specificity in terms of percentages. Similarly, for specificity, the probability of a negative test in presence of the disease. Sorry, in absence of the disease, percentage of negative test in the absence of a disease. So negative test, that is the true negative, Tn represents the true negative divided by true negative plus false positive. This is the population actually not having the disease. So this multiplied by 100, this gives the specificity. Next, other two quantities we define considering only those who test positive, that is positive predictive value. PPV, this is the ratio of the patients who have the disease to all who test positive. Number of people tested positive is TP plus AP who have been detected as positive, and this is the true positive is the actual true positive that we obtain. So true positive divided by true positive plus false positive, this gives the positive predictive value. Similarly, negative predictive value is defined as the ratio of Tn true negative divided by true negative plus false negative. So in any hypothesis testing, our objective would be to minimize the false positives and false negatives. If we see the data distributions like this is the part negative or true negative, and this part, part as marked with lines, this actually corresponds to the false positive. Here also for this curve, this part is indicating the false negative part, and this is the true positive part. So this threshold line should be drawn in such a way that these two areas could be minimized as possible. Next, we would be dealing with some typical case studies, biomedical applications for detection and screening of anemia. We all are quite familiar with anemia. There are different forms of anemia, of which iron deficiency anemia is the most commonly occurring one. Anemia it has come from the word "and", actually in medical terminology, "and" represents without, and emia represents blood or some presence of some substance in the blood. So anemia is a condition in which number of red blood cells or the hemoglobin content within them is reduced than that of the normal quantity, which results in a condition where these blood cells are having reduced capacity of carrying oxygen to the body tissues. This anemia can manifest with several different symptoms, of which the common symptoms are headache, loss of appetite, dizziness, fatigue, disrupted sleep, alopecia, fatigue, lack of concentration, reduced menstrual bleeding. There are a lot of such symptoms commonly occurring. According to a World Health Organization statistics, India is one of the countries where prevalence of anemia is quite higher. if we see particular scenario, we can observe that there are 74% children under 3 years and 52% of the pregnant women are found to be anemic. This screening of anemia can be done by testing the blood, drawing the venous blood and then test in the laboratory. There are different mechanisms, serum methemoglobin tests. These are being performed for detecting the amount of hemoglobin level in the blood. But in a rural environment, due to lack of awareness, people, those who are having anemia, symptoms of anemia, they due to lack of awareness, they even can't test. There are a lot of such difficulties. There are poor infrastructure, no super specialty facility available, even the nearby laboratory, lack of trained technicians for drawing the venous blood, especially for obese patient, aged patient and children. Drawing venous blood is very difficult. For only certain trained technicians can perform this task. So in such a situations, clinicians need to rely on physical observation of pallor in eyes, palm, nail, and all, in the skin also. So this way, clinicians can make an approximate assessment of anemia. All these demand the low-cost portable device which could be used anywhere by anyone for easy testing of blood hemoglobin level for basic screening of anemia. So keeping in mind these issues, we have one more thing I must mention. Due to lack of awareness, even apart from these administrative issues, rural people, the villagers can have taboo of donating blood. Sometimes fear of needle prick. They thought giving blood for testing, this might cause them anemic. These are the practical hindrances in applying this diagnostic test over there. So keeping this in mind, we revisited the usual practice of assessing anemia by checking pallor in nail and palm. We augmented it with state-of-the-art computational procedure to design a smart anemia care system where we can non-invasively estimate the accurate blood hemoglobin level, and also some classifications of anemia we can perform. There are certain work in this domain is currently being performed. Some all these are mostly image processing based techniques. In this work, they have taken images of nail bed, just a static pattern, images of nail bed. They have done some processing for detecting the ROI. They remove some scars in the nail. Sometimes we have white scars in the nail, which we call leukonychia, these kind of things, and also camera flash. These white regions you can see in the figure, these are being removed by applying image processing techniques. From that, after that, they collect feature values from nail data, skin data, and also from some other image metadata. And by using a robust multilinear regression model, they can predict the blood hemoglobin level. Another work is also being done in this domain, which is observing pallor in eye conjunctiva. They take the images of eye. From that, by doing image processing, they detect the eye, then this conjunctiva portion, this ROI selection for this region is automatically being done. Then by analyzing the intensity of these red, green, and blue channels and taking features from these intensity values, they use a logistic regression model to predict hemoglobin level based on the criteria. Like hemoglobin values less than 11.5 would be anemic, and greater than 11, greater or equals to 11.5 would be treated as non-anemic. Based on that, they have classified like this. We are doing a work in this domain. This work actually is is under a sponsored research project under Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, METI, and is being implemented by NIT Durgapur. We are instead of considering static patterns, we are working with dynamic patterns. We are taking video of nail and palm with certain preconditions. With a device, with the help of a device, we are taking this through the this video is actually recorded by a smartphone, and we are analyzing this video, extracting frames. We are detecting the ROI. Then we are plotting the histogram of this image by comparing the each of the frames. We find some correlation, and this correlation graph we plot. From the graph, we extract some certain features. And finally, we fed them into some regression models, different regression models we have tried, of which this support vector regression, gradient boosting regression, these are performing well. We have tried with these techniques. The principle of operation, I'm just describing that there are the different subsystems we have designed. This is the data acquisition subsystems. We have collected data from nail and the palm of a hand of any individual. With those data, these are processed through some data processing techniques. And finally, we are analyzing the data for predicting the values of hemoglobin. Basically, this data from both nail and palm is being fixed on through these customized devices, and we apply some pressure through the devices. We collect and we release the pressure, and in between we record the timestamps of certain events, which by processing we are estimating the blood hemoglobin level. Such devices could have greater societal benefits, like these are completely non-invasive, no need for needle prick or anything. Only just by taking video of nail and palm, we are doing this. These are very much portable, a small kind of device. Anyone, anywhere can use it. These are very low-cost devices. It can provide primary healthcare at home. Even a person who is at isolation can use this device for monitoring purpose. Such device can act as a consultant. It can give you alarming situations whenever certain emergencies are appearing with respect to your hemoglobin values and all. This helps in segregating the prone to anemic persons. If we take on a large population, we can have certain percentage of people who are facing severely anemic conditions. Those can be segregated and treated accordingly. This is some of our processing steps. We perform data acquisition. We then perform some image pre-processing steps over there. From this, we analyze and we evaluate the image metrics. We plot the correlation graph. From the graph, we extract some features which are being fed into the prediction model, and through which we can predict a very accurate value of hemoglobin level. Basically, the computational models that we are considering over here, from the collected data, we form the feature vectors. We extract the features which are being fed into the machine learning algorithms. Here, we are basically dealing with supervised learning. The data we are collected from the subjects, and for those subjects, we are also performing, for the training data, we are also performing the clinical test of hemoglobin level for all those subjects. These are the levels. With these clinically tested hemoglobin levels, we level the experimental data through which we make our model trained. Once the model is trained, we can use it for testing purpose. We give the test input. From this test input, feature vectors are being formed, and these are being fed into the predictive model, and the expected level would be determined from this predictive model. Examples of learning problems. As we know, in today's computing paradigm, in different sectors, this machine learning could have their potential applications. This plays a key role in many such areas of science, finance, and industry. For example, we can use machine learning to predict whether a patient who is hospitalized due to some heart attack will have a second chance of heart attack or not, based on some demographic, diet, and also some clinical measurements, clinical parameters for that patient. We can do this kind of predictions also. We can predict the price of a stock in the 6 months from now on the basis of company performance and performance, as well as the economic data. Based on this, based on analyzing this data, we can predict the possible values. We can identify the numbers in handwritten report from digitized image. For a parcel, the zip code is, suppose it is in hand, it is being photographed. From that, we can, by analyzing that digital image, we can identify those handwritten digits for further processing. We can estimate the amount of blood glucose for a diabetic patient from infrared absorption spectrum of that corresponding person's blood. All those kind of analysis could be done with the help of machine learning techniques. We can also identify the risk factors for prostate cancer based on some clinical and demographic variables. Once we have certain amount of data for particular problem, we can use machine learning techniques to train the model with those level data, and then we can use this for further prediction. Actually, we can use it for prediction as well as inference also. We will be seeing this. What is the learning problem? Is learning from data is basically used in some situations where we don't have any analytic solutions available. We need to learn it from the data that is available, and we need to form empirical solutions from this available data. We need to learn the solution, and then we can report the solution. So the basic premise of the learning from the data is the use of a set of observations to understand the underlying procedure. So essentially, it requires a huge amount of data that is essentially required for understanding the process. So, for example, suppose we have observed the output space yi, it's denoted by yi, and the input is denoted by xi. It's consisting of these components, say xi1 up to xip, where i is ranging from 1 to n. So we assume that there is a relationship between this y and at least one of these x's. So we can model the relationship as this with respect to some function, that is yi is equals to f is any function. It's a f of xi, a function of xi. Y is defined in terms of a function of xi plus some other quantity, that is epsilon I, which is basically a random error or a noise term. I'm coming to that. Suppose we have this data, these are these dots, these are the data points in the this is the spread of the data. Now we can, this function f, through this function f we can draw this line. Actually this would have our, this would define our model. So once we from sufficient observations, we can learn this function. Once we have learned this function, then we can use this function for estimating the value of y for any unknown x. And here you see this epsilon I, this is for a particular data point I, the distance of this data point from this estimated curve. So this is basically the error. We use modern machine learning methods for estimating f by learning from the data. And this target function f is actually unknown. We have to estimate this f based on the observation. So we estimate f basically for two key purposes, two major function of f. for which F is being used. This is prediction and inference. For prediction, by producing a good estimate of the function F, where the variance of epsilon is not too large. Variance of epsilon, these values of epsilon is having a larger variability. So it could have. So our method of estimating F would be in such a way that these variation in epsilon could be as minimum as possible. So in that case, if we can estimate F in such a way, that would result into a good prediction model. So we can, once we have done this, we can predict Y using this formula. That's Y cap is the value for the unknown dependent variable. This F cap X is in terms of this function F, where this F cap represents our estimate for the function F, and Y cap is the predicted result. For example, let us consider a real life problem, a direct mailing prediction. Say we are interested in predicting how much money an individual will donate based on some observation from 90,000 people on which some 400 different characteristics have been noted. So it is not our concern to have much about each individual characteristics. Rather, we can form it as learning problem. As for a given individual, should I send out a mailing to that person or not, based on the probability that he or she might contribute, might donate or not. These are typical examples. Yeah. Next is inference. Instead of prediction, we may also be interested in type of relationship between Y and the X's. For example, we can have those key questions related to this, which predictors actually affect the response. There could be many different possible predictors that can affect the final response. So which one is mostly affecting the response? The relationship of, is the relationship positive or negative? It is affecting positively or negatively? Is the relationship a simple linear or it is a non-linear relationship? For example, housing inference. We predict house prices based on some numerical variables. We want to learn which variables have the largest impact on the response and how much it can affect. So for example, we can have such estimates like number of bedrooms or the square feet area can have a major impact on the house values. Now, for estimating F, how we can estimate F? This is very important. First of all, we are assuming that we have observed a set of training data. That is for which, for this X, which we call as independent variable or feature like that. For this X1, we know the Y1. Similarly, for X2, we have this value Y2. And for all these M data points, we have this output known. Second, we use this training data and a machine learning method for estimating this function F. There are different methods, parametric method and non-parametric methods we can use for estimation of the F. Once we have estimated F, we can use it for testing. So there are some trade-offs in learning algorithms. There are basically two aspects which we need to consider when we are designing a learning algorithm. We try to fit the data well to the model, and it should be as robust as possible. With minor changes, its output should not get disturbed. The predictor that you can have, it has been generated using your training data. It must also work well on the new data, that is the test data. What you have, the predictor that you have modeled by using the training data, that should work with your test data also. Now, other points like when we create a predictor, usually the simpler the predictor is, it would be more robust. Simpler predictors are more robust, and it tends to be in the sense of being able to be estimated more reliably. We can have a more reliable estimation of such predictors. And on the other hand, simple models do not feed the training data aggressively. So we need to make a trade-off between these two. Now, some training error versus testing error. If we have training error which reflects whether the data fits well or not, and testing error which reflects whether the predictor actually works on the new data, means test data correctly or not. Bias versus variance is bias. Is how good the predictor is on average. It gives a measure of that. It tends to be smaller with more complicated models. However, variance, it tends to be higher for more complex models. For variance lesser. So here also we are defining the if, this function if. We need to take care of these issues, this bias and variance. It should be, both should be minimized. So we need to make a trade-off between this. Fitting versus overfitting. If we try to fit the data too aggressively, then we may result into overfitting the training data. And this means that the predictor works very well for the training data, but it fails to work well with the test data. Some relevant terminologies we used in this case is the input X, which we also call feature or a predictor or an independent variable, and the output Y is also called response or dependent variable. Categorization, we use two different categories of learning algorithms we basically used: supervised learning and versus unsupervised learning. Here the key question is whether Y is available in the training data. If we know the level output of the training data, then this is a supervised learning. Then we use this supervised learning models. If this level data is not available, we use unsupervised learning. Also, the regression versus classification, if we have Y as quantitative or qualitative. If it is quantitative, that means, say, hemoglobin level prediction that we have used over here. We are predicting the hemoglobin level as certain physical quantity like hemoglobin HB level as certain values and the unit is, say, gram per deciliter, gram per DL. So it's a quantitative output. Here regression models would be applicable, but where we need to have qualitative prediction, whether suppose an image has been given, whether it is a cat or dog, this kind of classification, this deals with the qualitative measurements. Yeah, so quantitative measurements, here measurements or counts is recorded as numerical values like, say, physical quantities like height, temperature, weight, etc. And qualitative, it could be group or categories. For example, ordinal, which possesses a natural ordering like shirt sizes and all, and nominal, just name the category like marital status, gender, some category like animal, human being. This kind of categories falls into this nominal category. Yeah, we can have these training samples. For example, for these values of x1, x2 up to xp, for all these features, these are the features. For all these features, we know the output level as, say, A. For each and every samples in the training set, we know the output level Y. Now for testing data set, we have these features same features with maybe some varying values for these these components, but we don't know the output. This has to be obtained from the underlying function. With these training samples, we need to estimate the function A. This becomes our model. And while we are having the testing part, these test inputs are given, and the Y value for these test inputs are being calculated from this model, trained model. Examples of supervised learning, suppose, say we are making this machine trained with, this is a dog, this is a dog, this is a cat. And then we are showing this image. This is a test input. What is this? We are asking this, it outputs that this is a dog. So this is our training set. This is the testing set. So in classification, we use generally categorical output, but in regression model, we use continuous output, quantitative output. Unsupervised learning, it is, we don't have such level. We have this image, whether it is a dog, cat, or cow. Based on that, there are different clusters are being made. They would be accordingly reported in which cluster this belongs. Then semantic meanings of these clusters are not very clear to this end. For these regression models are very much important for several variety of applications. There are a lot of such regression models available. This linear regression, logistic regression, ridge regression, lasso, polynomial, Bayesian, linear. There are many more such regression models which would be applicable for different applications. With this available model, for example, if we could have a data set, we can apply this. There are two different approaches. One is the naive approach. We have this data set, we apply all the models and check the accuracy, how accurately it is predicting the value. This way we can pick out the most efficient one, or else we can, if we have the scope, we can analyze the characteristics of the data, for what particular correlation of the data, which model could be more appropriate. Accordingly, we can use that model and check, we can validate our assumption by experiments. Now, assessing the model accuracy for a given set of data, we need to decide which machine learning method produces the best result. So for this, what we do, we measure the accuracy of the models. So we need some way to measure the quality of fit, that is how well the predictions actually match the observed data, how close the predicted value is to the true value. Basically, in regression model, we typically use mean squared error. For our anemia detection, there's a hemoglobin estimation approach. We also use regression model. We have collected real-time data. We fit it into the model, and accordingly, we obtain the prediction results. Next, another application I will be discussing, another biomedical application, detection screening of COVID-19. A lot of work in this domain has been done. We had done this work at the very beginning of COVID infections, in mostly around June 2020. COVID-19, no need for more introduction to COVID-19. It is a very infectious disease, lung infection, which has so far infected quite a large number of people with significant death rates. For COVID screening, we usually perform RT-PCR, reverse transcription, polymerase chain reaction. This test is used for detection of COVID-19, which usually takes a few hours, even a day. It can take for giving the result. And sometimes this also results into false positive or false negative. In case of in the peak time of infection, where a majority of the population is getting infected due to lack of sufficient number of test kits, COVID testing with the required amount of COVID testing was not possible. It's getting hampered. The detection and screening process, it's getting bottlenecked. So in this case, we can use some alternative methods for COVID detection by using X-ray or CT scan images of the suspect. We can use these images, diagnostic images. We can do we can apply some image processing techniques on this. We use it into a deep learning model and get the prediction based on the analysis, whether it is a positive or negative COVID cases. So the COVID scenario is quite known to us. We have already gone through different phases of COVID infections, and already we have faced the scarcity of these test kits and all. So with this in mind, we decided to explore alternative methods for detecting COVID. Actually, in case of COVID, if a non-infected or asymptomatic person is exposed to some COVID cases, he or she might be symptomatic infected or asymptomatic infected. If it is asymptomatic infected, after some time, it may get recovered or death cases may occur. In case of asymptomatic infection, after a few days, it could be symptomatic, or else it could be recovered from here. And we know an infected person on an average can infect 2 to 2.5 average number of people. So this is very frightening. We can, with keeping in mind these scenarios, we define our problem for detecting COVID-19 based on the chest X-ray and CT scan images of a suspected individual. We develop a model using convolutional neural network, CNN, which is very commonly used in case of image processing, image recognition algorithms. We have used fusion techniques with these fusion techniques of image processing based data augmentation with this convolutional neural network for realizing our model. We resolve the issue of smaller number of images for training the deep learning models, and we increase the data by using multiple representations of the same X-ray or CT scan images by using some sharpening filters. This convolutional neural network, this convolutional neural networks is composed of an input layer and an output layer, and one or more such hidden layers in between. These hidden layers are a combination of convolutional layer, pooling layers, normalization layers, and fully connected layers. These are the related to network architectures. I'm not going into the details of this network architecture. Actually, most of the people might have this idea. They are working on this. I will rather focus on the application part, how these are being applied. Now, the CNNs can use multiple convolutional layers to filter input volumes to a greater level of abstractions. These are the major components. It should have a kernel, which is also called a filter or a feature detector, stride, pooling, flattening. These are the components I will be showing just with a brief introduction to this. Applications of CNN, we all know this is basically applied in image recognition or classifications, also in audio video recognition or audio video classifications. We use CNN models. Suppose, this in the convolution layer image, the input image is convolved. For example, I have taken a smaller example, an input image of 6x6 dimension. And we use a filter, a 3x3 filter on this input. Now, what is the utility of applying filter? We know in image, given an input image, we can apply different types of filters to do some operations on the image, like enhancing contrast, by blurring for sharpening the image or for blurring the image. There are different operations we can perform on this input image, and accordingly different filters need to be applied. So this filter, a 3x3 filter, I have shown here one example filter. This filter, when applied to this image, we will first start from this top leftmost corner. This will be placed on top of this basically. So to have a one-to-one correspondence, actually we need to perform of these corresponding cells of this 3x3 submatrix of this original image along with this 3x3 filter. So this 4 multiplied by 1 plus 9 multiplied by 0 plus 2 multiplied by -1 plus 5 multiplied by 1, 6 multiplied by 0 plus 2 multiplied by -1 plus 2 multiplied by 1 plus 4 multiplied by 0 plus 5 multiplied by -1. So it's resulting into 2. So we can write this value in the output matrix or the convert image. This square will have the value as 2. So next we would be moving this filter one column to the right. So in the next operation, this filter will be here, just one column to the right. Again, doing the same dot product operation, we can construct the value of this cell. Now this way, this in the next step, it will be moved one column to the right. Then in the next step, another column to the right. This entire row has been covered. Next, it would be moved to the left and one row below the first row. So next step, it would be covering these 3x3 submatrix of the image. Again, it will move according to these rows. Again, this procedure would be repeated until we cover the entire image. So this would result into a 4x4 matrix, which we also call, it is the convolved image, also called the feature map. Now, how this 4x4 has come? From this dimension, we have taken this input image as the dimension 6x6 and the filter as dimension 3. So in general, if we have the input image dimension as I/I and the filter size as k/k, so the size of the feature map F would be I minus k plus 1. So here 6 minus 3 plus 1. 6 minus 3 is 3 plus 1, 4. So 4x4 would be the dimension size of the feature map. Now here we are moving, while we are moving this filter to the right or even to the bottom, we are just leaving one column. We are shifting it by one column to the right or one row to the downside. So here our stride is 1. Instead of taking the stride as 1, we can consider the stride as 2 also. In that case, this output size will even be reduced. So the normal formula for the feature size would be actually I minus k divided by s, where s is the stride, plus 1. So here stride is 1, so we got 4. If stride is 2, it would even be lesser. So 6 minus 3 by 2. 3 by 2 is 1 plus 1, so it would be reduced to a 2 by 2 matrix. Now, what is the need for this? Actually, the input, the images in the convolutional neural network, we are giving images as input for recognition or identification. So input images could be of very larger sizes, like it could be of 2048 by 2048 or even larger than that. And if we need to process such large sized images, actually in the input layer, when we are giving the input image is a 2D matrix, we have to map it to a 1D matrix, and this would be fed as the input to the nodes in the input layer. So if we have these image sizes like 2048 by 2048, so 2048 multiplied by 2048, this many number of inputs we need to consider in the input layer. Accordingly, other layer sizes will increase, increasing the entire network size, which also cost quite higher. So here we are doing some processing to preserve the important features by also while we are reducing the dimension. This is also called dimensionality reduction. See here, once we have computed this entire convolved image or the feature map, this is the corresponding feature map. From this, we can use in the next layer is the max pooling. Actually, in the pooling layer, we can have different options. We can actually take some aggregation of the values. For example, here actually we would be dividing this resultant matrix into submatrices, each of size 2 by 2. And within each of these 2 by 2 matrix, we can take aggregation of the values. We can take the maximum value, we can take the average value. So even we can take the summation of these values accordingly. Here we have used max pooling technique. So we are choosing from this 2 by 2 matrix, we are choosing the maximum value and we are preserving this. Even now from these 2 by 2 matrix, we are choosing the maximum value 8. So we are taking this from this also maximum value, from this also the maximum value. So this actually preserves the distinct, more prevalent features. Now with this, after this max pooling, we have this pooled feature map. This is flattened. This 2D matrix is converted into a 1D matrix, which is directly being fed into the network. This is a fully connected network. This is the input layer. These are having a number of hidden layers depending on the network size and based on some specific requirements, and we do have the output layer. So here our proposed methodology, we consider these following steps. We accept a colored input image from the dataset. We convert the image into a grayscale image, and then we obtain histogram. We apply histogram equalization to correct the contrast of the given grayscale input image. We find the edges by applying certain edge detection operators. We have used a certain number of edge detection operators like Sobel, Prewitt, Robert, Canny, Laplacian, Sher, and also we have designed a hybrid filter by combining the Canny and Sobel edge detector with certain weightage. Canny actually it's having some blurring effect, but Sobel it's having some sharpening effect. So we have given more weightage to Sobel, and Canny we have given a lesser weightage. This way we combine the Canny and Sobel edge detector to form a hybrid edge detector. This is very efficient. We also, given the input image, we applied these separately, these filters and also these hybrid filters to generate a number of representations of the same image. Considering the original image, and also we have including hybrid, we have 7 such operators. So 7 additional images are generated from the original image, which adds a benefit to our model, which helps in ensuring a better accuracy of the model. These generated images, this multiple representation, these are used in the dataset and dataset for analysis. You see here, this multiple representation, this is the X-ray data and this is the CT scan data. We have worked based on an available data set. This is the original image, and these are the images obtained from different filters, of which most probably this is the one obtained from the hybrid filter. Here also this is the one obtained by the hybrid filter. So these data are incorporated in the data set and is being used in the network model for use. Here we have carried the experimentation with different configurations. In the first one, we have used 32 different filters. We have in the training set, we have a 50 by 50 image, which we have convert. So its dimension gets reduced. 50 minus, we have used a 3 by 3 filter. So 50 minus 3, 47 plus 1. 48. So we obtain a 48 by 48 size image. Then we use the max pooling, the dimension gets halved. And finally, we have used flattening over here. And this is from this, we generate the output here. There's no hidden layers considered. Here is another alternative. We have used 64 filters. Same thing has been applied over here. Actually, two steps of convolution has been performed over here. Convolution, then max pooling, then again convolution, then max pooling. Then finally, we have flattened the pooled feature map, and we use these two dense layers in the network, and this is the output. Here also another alternative we have tried. So 128 filters we have used in this. Here we have used 3 convolution layers and also 3 dense layers, 3 hidden layers accordingly, of which this configuration with 64 filter, this gives the best result. Here is our result analysis that has been shown. We have checked with different test trend splits, 70, 30, 80, 20, with different possibilities. We use this ResNet 50 and VGG 16 for the CT scan and X-ray images. These are the results that we have obtained. Yes, this is for CT scan image. This is for X-ray images. This is the proposed CNN, and for this is the results for ResNet and VGG with different trend test splits. It is 70, 30 and 80, 20. The results has been presented over here. Also, we have shown the original and the augmented original data set, results with the original data set and results with the augmented data set for both the CT scan and X-ray images, considering our model. This is only for our model with the original data set and the augmented data set. So essentially, we are obtaining an accuracy for the X-ray images 96%. For CT scan image, 96% for the CT scan images and 98% accuracy for the X-ray images. So basically, here we have reported 2 different case studies wherein the applicability of different state-of-the-art computational models have been discussed. Such systems basically targets improvement in the overall improvement in the healthcare systems. For example, the smart anemia care system can easily be used by anyone, anywhere, even in a resource-poor environment. It can be used quite effectively for screening of anemia. The system proposed for screening of COVID-19, it overcomes the issues of lack of test kits, also minimizes the cost of testing. It's quite easy to use by diagnostic and medics person, which and also it ensures a rapid, very quick with high accuracy. Hello.
Hello. Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. So any questions from the audience?
So participants, please, if you have any question, please ask to Professor Mamata Dolui Chakraborty, please. Or if you would like to ask questions, you can also write in the chat box.
Yes.
So since there is no question coming from the audience.
Okay, if you don't have any questions, even if you have further questions, you can mail me.
Yes. So please, you may note down the mail ID of the speaker. So that is already mentioned in the last slide. And participants, just remember that today we have an online test starting from 4:15 p.m. and it is mandatory to obtain the certificate. And the link will be posted in the WhatsApp group. So the exam will be started from 4:15 p.m. and it will remain active till 5 p.m. So thank you, Professor, for this
Okay.
informative session. It was really helpful, and this is a small token of appreciation from our end. And we'd like to have in our next FDPs also. It was really an
Okay,
wonderful
sure.
session.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So
Okay, so this is possibly the last session of your event.
yes, this is the last session.
Yeah, okay. Hope you have a great success to this event.
Sorry.
Thanks to all of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Welcome.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you all participants. So just give the exam on time at 4:15 p.m. So this is the end of this session.